Hello, folks, and welcome to Karate Without Belts. We need to stop joking around before we start recording. I'm John.
And I'm Jeremy.
Having a little fun before the podcast, talking about, among other things, the delicious new strain of the influenza that's coming out. Happy Lunar New Year, everyone. Please be safe. Please wash your hands. Please put on your masks.
And hazmat gear. So
yeah, I live relatively closer to where this is happening than you. I actually feel safer, but we'll see what happens. But aside from possible apocalyptic world-ending plague, Jeremy, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Just dealing with the weather not making up its mind, whether it wants to be warm, whether it wants to snow, ice. I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to sit back, relax, wait until you make up your mind, and then, okay, we're done. And the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, so, I mean, everybody here in Kansas City is going nuts, so it's...
Super Bowl talk on Karate Without Belts, folks.
Sorry.
I mean, the Chiefs, I mean, I have no real... what's his name?
Mahomes?
Who's the coach?
Oh, Reed?
Yeah, we had him with the Eagles for a long time, and everyone hated him. So, but I guess that's just Philadelphia.
Yeah, hey, it's all right. It's all good.
Yeah, here it's been about the same. Yesterday I ran my legs off for about 4 hours, so I think I can genuinely say I pushed a limit. It was good training. It was a good training week. I spent about 3 hours in a hospital waiting for a doctor to just tell me, "Oh, just sleep more," because I was feeling super fatigued. I was like, "Why am I so knackered this week?" And he's waiting around just for the grandmas and grandpas to, yell very loudly. And once they got to me, they were just like, you have some higher than normal muscle damage. I'm like, yeah, I train. And he's like, oh, that's why. Well, you're fine. Just rest more. All right. 3 hours later.
It's all good.
No big secret about that. But unlike what we're going to talk about today, which is about the secrets of martial arts. And I think this comes out of kind of how we wrapped up last week's podcast, or I guess in our continuity, because Micah's podcast is going to come out before this one. 2 weeks ago's podcast, the time in which we last had me and Jeremy on this podcast. I'm trying to prefigure this. Essentially, I was talking about being... Jeremy, you put it really, really well about being open and honest when teaching and training.
Yeah, and I guess in a way I kind of want to clarify that parting comment, when somebody asks to train with you, be appreciative of the fact that they recognize your skill and stuff like that. But on the same token, to clarify that, I mean, you also don't want to just give everything away, and you want to make sure that those people do have the skill set to be able to understand it. You also want to make sure that they also understand, the historical background, or at least the respect of what you're actually providing to them, so that they don't misuse it, that they don't take it lightly and like, okay, yeah, whatever. Okay, that's great, whatever, And so I think there is a double-edged sword, but at the end of the podcast, something just kind of basically stirred my pot, and I was reminded of a situation that, I'll be perfectly honest, just ticked me off, and it's like, you know what, I need to say something about it, and outside the podcast, I'd be more than happy to talk about exactly the situation that's happened with me in the past. I don't want to get into politics and irritating people, but
look, we don't have any evidence of this, but we need to get enough people to allow evidence to be introduced so we can have a legitimate trial about this, Jeremy. All right, last thing. Talk about politics in this podcast.
Yeah, no, I got you. But
I like to say this. A good friend of ours. Hopefully, we can get him on the podcast at some point. Has said we're kind of like the island of lost toys to a degree. That a lot of us were. Anyone who's listened to this podcast probably understands that. Who's probably caught it at least that we were a part of other organizations and stuff. Been part and parcel with other stuff. And they kind of now are not that case. We're kind of what happens after that. But we are not here to kind of spill a bunch of hate towards people or anything like that. It's because we see this as a positive movement forward.
Or air out dirty laundry as well. I mean, and that's not it's not what we want to do, and it's not what I want to do either. So
No, it's not worth our time, because a lot of our time being a part of a lot of these things has also been hearing other people air dirty laundry about other people, and then just kind of, it's a fraction of a digression of a beef from two people had that spawned and morphed in a weird way, and it's not worth going into. But what is worth going into is understanding, what it is, Jeremy's exactly talking about, is that what time does it's kind of the onus of understanding from a learning perspective, and understanding from a teaching perspective, and understanding from a general content perspective. What is the quote unquote secrets that someone may or may not have in terms of understanding karate? And generally, there's a mystique, there's a weird understanding that people have, that especially East Asian martial arts has some sort of mystical secret about it. Unlike boxing or wrestling or something supposedly more, Western European, that's just very simple punch, kick, grab, but probably just has as many secrets of its own. We're kind of unfortunately mystiqued in mystery. I think a lot of that has to do with kata, and a lot of that has to do with misunderstandings of how stuff works. So today we're gonna kind of try to break down what that all means.
I mean, when I start thinking about that and stuff, I look at a couple different ways. I try to look at it from my instructor's point of view and who I've trained with, and then I also try to look at it from different leadership styles, different people who have come before, such as like when you read the Book of Five Rings, or you read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do from Bruce Lee. I mean, we're not talking about those styles, but I try to follow more along that mental perspective, in which usually whenever I've been shown something or something like that, I mean, I'll work on it, and then I'll try to find somebody that I can teach it to fairly quickly so that I learn it better. And I am giving it to someone else, but on the same token, I'm trying to get better at it myself. And what I've learned is, over years of not only teaching martial arts, but also teaching computer science, mathematics, all that kind of stuff, I get better at it when I start teaching it, verbalizing it, and things like that. One of my instructors, I mean, now that I'm getting older, I can't remember which one said it, but one of them had mentioned, when you're doing kata, or you're doing weaponry, or you're doing something, whatever you're doing, if you're training on your own, it's not a bad thing to talk to yourself and walk yourself through these things, so that you're not just building muscle memory, you're also building vocalization, or being able to auditory whatever you're doing, along with listening to it as well. So in other words, you got three senses going on at the same time. Your feel, speech, and hearing. So,
and you can actually, at least to yourself, that might always not make sense to somebody you're talking to, but you can at least articulate to yourself what it means when you're doing it. And I think that's where people find stuff, where they actually discover things in their martial arts, they discover things in the katas, they discover things in their training, is when they try to look at it from not an analytical view, but a step-by-step view from what you're doing. I know this for sure, is when there's one way of training, which is just the physical side of it, working up a sweat, working out, getting the training in. But there's a side of that kind of misses the point, that I feel like if you're just doing push-ups, or you're just doing sit-ups, or you're just doing shadow boxing or bag drills or whatever, there's a limited amount of stuff that you're actually able to do. But if you're as you're saying, is with that mental exercise, then you're actually able to see stuff. And then when you actually start working with people, then you can actually try to articulate what you mean and what you see. If you don't have that ability to do that, then I see this a lot, is where people are like, we're gonna do this, okay. And they're not able to explain it. They're not able to break it down. They're just able to do it, and that's it.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about, what I'm going to talk about next is not so much picking anybody or everybody out, but sometimes sometimes you'll run into this. Somebody may have just learned something, and it may be something pretty intense, or they've been shown some secret of some sort, secret technique or whatever it is in the art. And somebody comes up and asks them, well, hey, can you show me? There are several reasons why somebody may not show that to you. One could be who passed it on to you basically directed you not to show it to anyone, and you're trying to, respect what they're telling you to do. Another is you just learned it and you just barely learned it and you really don't want to make a mistake. So therefore, well, that's secret. And it's kind of like, instead of it's secret, it's kind of like, I'm really not totally sure yet. So I really don't want to teach you. Or it's like, I've got some type of prize and I don't want to give that out, and it's like, it's mine, kind of.
You can't have it. It's mine. It's my little morsel. I'm going to run away with it. There's two sides to that, because it's like, well, I can understand why people would prize that, but at the same time, they probably don't understand what they got.
And that can be a whole topic on a whole other podcast, just going over that, the psychological aspects of people in martial arts. But I don't know about you. I'm not Dr. Phil. He's
No, we're not gonna go there.
I will say this: he can be entertaining at times. So
he's not a real doctor. He just became a real doctor or something like that. Like he was never actually a real doctor.
I don't know what the.
He just has an easy mannerism to tell people that they're doing something wrong. Well, and he plays on daytime TV. So.
That part I personally don't know, but I mean, I thought there were certain parts he can do certain I don't care. Anyway, it doesn't. He's kind of entertaining. We'll stop with that.
We just found out that Jeremy is a huge Dr. Phil shill.
I am not a huge Dr. Phil person. Just every once in a while, what'll happen is my wife will send me some clip. Watch this, and I'm like, oh, geez. It can be kind of entertaining, and I'll be perfectly honest. I've used some of the techniques whenever, not only that I'm bringing up my kids, but even when I'm teaching, I've used some of that. It's like, wow, that sucked. How's that working for you? One of his famous lines. So how's that working for you? You just got knocked out. How's that working for you? It's different things like that. But
pulling in the secrets of martial arts via Dr. Phil style psychology.
And then okay, now we're getting back to it. And then you got another perspective of it where basically you're looking at the person who's asking you to teach, asking you to be taught, and you realize they don't have the skill enough to really get it or grasp it, understand it, or somehow they're not going to respect it the way you'd want them to possibly carry that on.
Because that's two things. Because there's one side, you have the people who aren't prepared to be able to take it on from a physical perspective. Yeah, they want to learn, but it's not where they should go right now. You have other people, and then the other side of what you were saying was just people who don't respect they're the takers. They're the people who they'll sit there with their cameras and record everything you're doing and try to emulate what you're doing, but they will in no way respect the fact that it's on that side. It's not theirs.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing I've always really been. I wouldn't say sensitive, but I've been very cautious about people videotaping anything that I've done. I usually don't let them videotape anything that I'm doing unless I've worked with them.
Right.
A lot of times if I'm working with somebody at like a seminar or something like that, and guess what, they're going to fly to New Zealand or Scotland or wherever.
Those two lands.
Yeah, I mean, or anywhere in between. Not around here. I feel like if I've worked with them, I feel like part of my teaching and me giving that knowledge to them, I think they deserve to have some type of video so that they can see it. They can refresh them. Okay, yeah, I remember when I was, and I've done the same thing. When I was learning a particular weapon, someone was from out of state. He was very gracious listen up. He said, you know what? I don't want to videotape it until after we've gotten to the very end and you understand or you stuck with it through the whole kata. At that point, yeah, I'll be more than happy to videotape. And then that way you got a reference point to go by. And that's totally cool, you know.
There's a mental exercise of that too, where it's just being patient enough to get to the end of something to understand it. There's also an element of that is also of event organization. You know, you're going to work on one thing for 4 or 5 hours. You're going to work on one thing for 2 hours. You know, the absorption factor there is, you know, quite limiting.
And that's one of the things that I got from, you know, Sensei Oyata. And it happened after I had left the organization. And I think on a previous podcast I'd mentioned this. I mean, I remember us being in seminars and we'd be doing Nazi Shodan for 3, 4, 5 hours or more, you know. And basically it was to get people to really pull their head out of their butt so they're ready to train. And so that he could actually show us what he wanted to show us. And I remember running into that big time in the one class. And I remember feelings like, you know, something ain't right, something ain't right, something ain't right. We're going to do this again. We're going to do this again. And finally, after I left, I'm like, okay. I mean, the light bulb finally went off a little ways down the road after I'd left. It was like, oh, I knew, you know, each one of those students, they were not paying attention to what they were supposed to be paying attention to.
I feel like in itself is a bit of a secret you can teach.
And this is kind of interesting. I mean, I've taken my son and he started his first karate lesson last week.
Ooh.
But I've taken him to a different school because I've realized he's not going to want to listen to Dad. And I'm like, okay, let somebody else do up to a certain point. I mean, there's a certain point where I'll probably stop the lessons because, I mean, it's okay. It's good to learn the etiquette part of it and things like that. And that's more what I'm really looking for. It's not so much the skill, which from what I can tell, there's not much there, but that's okay.
There's also a community aspect to it where
it
is the constant back and forth I always go on, where is like, is it okay to remove that quote unquote dojo aspect in favor of a backyard family aspect? You know, part of me says that's okay because you get to focus on what's important. The other part says maybe that's not what you want to do at certain times.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll see. But like I said, it's just kind of playing out that way and just kind of seeing how that plays out as far as what they teach, how they teach, and stuff like that. So, but anyway, I didn't mean to get completely off track on that, but.
No, it's perfectly in track with what you were just saying. Getting to kind of back to, I think there is a secret there. There's a teaching secret with what you were saying about those seminars and those classes, where you learn a lot from a little, and making people do a lot is what is a secret that I think a lot of teachers are missing out on, and especially in the kind of the seminar culture of martial arts now, is that you I see it at a lot of different places where it's like you want to get a lot of students in front of a lot of different teachers and have them have a lot of experiences, and that's all good and fine. At the end of the day, if you can get them to do and focus on one thing, you know, there's a weird secret to understanding how to unlock stuff. I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think, like, because I kind of learned that from you to a degree, because if you're just working one thing, and you learn how to kind of break that down and understand it and balance it out in your head, then you can take those skills you learn from that and move it around.
If you've got a baseline, a base knowledge,
right,
and you understand. I hope I'm not quoting this leadership course, but I know it's going to come out sounding kind of like it. But if you understand the design of how it's actually going to work, then if you understand the design, you can change that design, and you understand the integrity of what your base knowledge is without affecting that base knowledge. If that makes sense.
So effectively, you're can kind of give an example. You're doing a right jab, you're doing a right jab, you're doing a right jab, you're doing a right jab. You understand how the jab works, you understand how your fist is supposed to be. So you always left your left hand back. And you maybe
Yeah.
do that 100 times every day, for 5 months straight. Then you change up the stance.
Or yeah, I mean, you can do that, or maybe add hips into it. I mean, one of the things I always go to is just a simple outside block.
Right.
Just a simple outside block, and I think that's one of the key concepts that I learned the beginning of analysis from. And you start with just an outside block, and you do it time and time and time and time again, and then once you start seeing, hey, the integrity of this is it's so much distance from your elbow to your ribs. It's at a certain angle, and then the fist is at a certain height. Bing, bang, boom, done. Now, let's just change that hand position. Instead of being this way, let's flip it around. Let's turn it, instead of being maybe this way, turn it vertical. Maybe snap, and then maybe move it forward and down. And start really working at, okay, the position has not changed, but how you got to that position may have changed. Therefore, your base knowledge is still there.
That is working out of a foundation.
Yes.
Which is not how a lot of people teach anymore.
No, and people are so, I mean, I hate to say this, but they're so preoccupied, so not present to what is around them in their mindset, to where they don't want to spend the time to do that. I think a lot of people do. They see the quick and easy, but they don't want to go through that kind of drill. And it's kind of like, I look at it kind of like mathematics. Oh yeah, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a scientist. I want to be this, and I want to be a mathematician. Get in a couple of courses of calculus. Guess what? You start watching them just fall away like the iguanas in Florida. If you've seen that, so it's kind of, I don't know. You know what I'm talking about, where the
Not particularly, but
the temperature got so cold that iguanas froze and they fell out of trees in Florida. So it's kind of, and I mean, and guess what? When you wanted to do this, you don't want to go through that, which basically you got to understand that foundation to move forward. Martial arts is the same thing. Body's the same thing. It's that same principle. So, and that's kind of how I've always taught. But I mean, it works well for me because, my degree's in mathematics. I'm used to it all the time. So
the analytical view of martial arts from that perspective, as opposed to the curriculum view of martial arts, where and karate, where it's just like, oh yes, you're a white belt, so you're gonna do this exercise. You gotta learn these blocks and these hands positions here. See, and your teachers from the 1920s there. See, and our new character on Karate Without Belts, the 1920s mobster karate teacher. Then you're gonna go on a green belt, see, and then you're gonna learn this kata, see.
Yeah, I mean, it takes it away from being a checklist as opposed to actual real learning, and I think a lot of people have trouble learning that way, and they do, or they've never really been exposed to it.
Well, and then at the end of the day, it also goes down to individual training versus group training. Can you really do base training in groups to the extent that everyone needs it? And then is everyone in the same group need the same thing?
Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, to set a foundation for a level of whatever your school is trying to accomplish, I don't think having that checklist there is a bad thing, but how you approach that checklist can be detrimental.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, hey, it's kind of like the proverbial, instead of going through guiding principles that we have, that we've been a part of, number 8, take care not to develop our in the past, some kata was studied for 3 years. Masters were analytically research and perfect their one kata for 10 years or more. Are we going to expect somebody to do one kata for 10 years? Probably not. No. I mean, that's.
I really want to find the evidence behind all that. I really want to dig.
But I do think I think it speaks to the concept of, hey, you need to build a foundation before you really try to venture off into something else.
And I think that's where the misconception of quote unquote secrets comes from.
Yes.
Where the secret really is in the analysis, because in the kokoroe, the guiding principles, yeah, there I pulled out the Japanese, the kokoroe. And the very previous principle was that, be familiar with the makiwara and other training equipment. Study the kata and the matches.
Yeah.
Study how people are training. Study how you are training.
Yeah.
Right. Study earnestly what you're doing. Go from simple to hard, and from easy to complex.
Yeah.
And if you really look at it, the people who are running to do the most complex stuff and do the most, to learn the secrets, to get to the end of the chart, as it were, aren't taking the steps to get. So
yeah.
when you're trying to get to the end of the chart really quickly, you're missing all the things you need to actually do. I mean, it literally is the finger pointing at the heavenly glory in that regard.
Absolutely, yes.
To drop and enter the dragon rock.
Exactly. And then you start getting into a lot of other areas with where is your instructor actually taking you? And so I think that's probably the next thing we were probably going to talk about, was moving into loyalty.
Well, yeah, and so this goes into what you said last week, and kind of we're writing on initially. And so, especially from a student's perspective, we have a lot of people who feel the need to be loyal to one instructor. And so talked about this a little last week, but from an instructor's perspective, you want to find people who are going to be loyal to your form of teaching. Like you said in the beginning of the podcast, you don't want to just give away the house to anybody who walks in. That's just a form of preservation of what you're doing, because I've run into this where you might have an idea for what you want, and you might know how you want to pass down whatever it is and whatever it is you've learned, and how you put it together, and how you like it being taught.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't trust that to somebody else, genuinely trust that to somebody else, then it's a real big problem. And you have to really make sure, especially when it comes down to what you tend to teach everyone and what you actually want them to understand. I think the key to it is to kind of have that in plain sight, to hide it in plain sight of what you're teaching. The DNA of your secret, of whatever it is which is obviously in what you do, unless you're trying to falsely show people constantly. Then there's a question of whether you are actually practicing what you really know, or are you just creating BS in front of people and kind of paper walling your real knowledge, paper walling your knowledge with BS. I think that there's a lot of problems there, and I've heard about this way too much, is that your secret should be in the DNA of the first class.
Yeah, I mean, at least very early on, yes, absolutely. I mean, depending upon what all you're teaching, I mean, you can run over to several classes, but, tying into that, you get a student view and you get the instructor. And I think the instructor view really needs to be, okay, I trust this person to give this knowledge to, but after a while, you also have to trust that person to be able to say, hey, look, I don't know all the information that's out there. I don't. And to be able to trust that student to go look at other sources and make sure that they can make good decisions of the sources that they go and look at, as opposed to just go to some schmuck in some school that all they're trying to do is take money and stuff. So
yeah, and I mean, that's where I think it's important in that particular case. It's important to have connections with people who are genuine, who want to genuinely share what they know and are open to what you have to say, and you can actually have a dialogue with, rather than what ends up happening, which is kind of like, what we like to say, like mafia martial arts, where it's, or even worse, like kind of like branch martial arts in some ways, where, there's the teacher, but he's got another teacher that he, kind of kicks up students to, and then he's got a head teacher that he kicks up students to. Not in that chain, but at least having a circle of people that or a group of people you can rely on, that you can connect with and you can trust and be genuine with, then you can help pass things down and then create something better than what you've had before.
Right.
And it's also to realize is that you're also in progress, that everyone's in progress, that the person that you go and start training with today won't be that same person in 5 years, when the next when that next new person walks in the door.
Absolutely. And I think, or at least I've always looked at my job as an instructor is how can I guide somebody to get the knowledge that they're looking for? Whether it's me, whether it's somebody else, whether it's even somebody I don't even like. I've sent people every once in a while to people I don't like, but if I knew that's what they were looking for, look, I think this is going to, according to what you're wanting, I think this is probably what's going to be best for you, and not be hung up that I've got all the answers or anything. So,
well, and the other side of that is it is to explain to people, what it really takes to get to the point where they want to go, and explain where your limitations are. Like if you just want a black belt, I really think it's okay to have the black belt in the back of the school and just say, okay, here you go, bye bye. And I think that's a perfectly fine for depending on the student's attitude. I think that's perfectly fine.
I can see that to a point, but I can also see I can see the first time that person gets into an altercation, they get really jacked up, and then they come back and blame you, and then that's a whole nother legality of stuff.
Well, that's never has anything to do with either the loyalty of the student or the quality of the teacher. That has everything to do with the situation. That's how a situation unfolds. I mean, you mentioned the Book of Five Rings, and I don't know if this is translated all that well, but one of the best quotes I remember, I pulled that stuff out in high school and just started reading it when I was supposed to be doing my homework. And, one of the most striking things I read in there was, an unskilled man can take down a skilled man. One person can take down many people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, by that logic, one unskilled person can take down an entire group of people who are skilled. Maybe not, I don't know. But from that logic, from that understanding, you really can't argue with that. So
I think the other trap you get into, and I touched on it briefly, is eventually you're going to get to a point in an organization or training with somebody or something, and you're gonna look at each other, and it's like, basically, does my training integrity match my personal integrity anymore?
Depending on the situation.
Yeah, and not to go into it, but that's why I left my previous organization, because there was something that happened that interfered with my personal integrity, and I felt like I couldn't effectively teach there any longer and be right. and be true to myself. I'm the one that had to look in the mirror of that. Now, each student eventually will get to that point. Maybe yeah, okay, maybe it's not so bad that I have to leave. Or maybe it's something that I compromise my own integrity just to be here.
And that's difficult, depending on your community.
Yeah, and how good is that for the individual? And I think sometimes, or I know in the past, I know of situations where when that's happened, it's like all ties are cut, and it's like this person is basically dead to me. And therefore, it's not so much you're not loyal to what was being taught, you're not loyal to something that's going on, and you're trying to address it, and you just come to a point where it can't be addressed.
And I mean, I largely agree with that. Where I've been in the middle of something where it didn't really involve me at all. I saw it kind of start where one person was kind of rising in prominence within the school. They started doing something within the school. The owner of the school wasn't careful about it. He didn't really understand what was going on. The owner of the school got jealous at the person who was rising in prominence, and in a heartbeat, that person was teaching at that school, and the owner, right after they got done teaching, said, "Get your stuff, give me the keys, you're done," and kicked them out after that person had taught for them and helped make them money.
Yeah.
And not literally down the street, that person opened a competing school. I think that particular group's mended fences at this point, maybe not, but I just kind of contacted the person that was happening to. It was what you expect.
Yeah.
That owner of that school was not careful with, wasn't even respectful of what was going on, didn't even really care, as long as they were making money.
Yeah, and that throws a whole new wrench into the whole mix. But
well, and that's what you mean when we talk about integrity. The secrets of any martial arts school or of any school are not worth your personal integrity.
Yeah.
Your loyalty to a teacher is going to stretch that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, how far are you going to go? How far are you going to follow this person? Some people I've seen have been very dangerous. To me, is very dangerous on just kind of the borderline of almost idolizing something like an instructor or something like that. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going there. And so that's me too. And so maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not going to idolize some instructor. I mean, I'm going to respect whatever teaching I'm getting from them, be able to apply it and move on. So,
well, and there's a large difference between respect, loyalty, and idolization.
Yes.
And you can be like Mr. Fanboy about something. I guess there's a certain place for that, but when it comes to martial arts, that's an activity. That's something that you do. That's something that it's not just something like you have a poster of somebody. You just don't have a poster of Chuck Norris on your wall. Like, if you want to try and be like Chuck Norris, you got to grow that beard and start hitting the mat real hard.
Yeah.
Maybe move to Texas. I don't know.
Hey, don't knock that. Don't get me wrong. I love Chuck, and I love all the Chuck jokes. I'm telling you right now. That's
right. We're not here to knock Chuck Norris, but I mean, if you're just growing the beard and not doing the training.
Well, I mean, another one is Bruce Lee.
Right.
And
that's an interesting can of worms there. The guy who says don't create your own personal style. And the moment the man died, you had factions saying we're going to do Bruce Lee's style, and the other faction saying he said not to have a style.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I hear people talk about things like greatest of all time. I mean different things like that. And don't get me wrong, I think Bruce Lee was somebody who had some very strong insights on things and stuff like that. But to say he was the greatest of all time, you take away hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of people that came way before us that passed the stuff on from years to years. Like, look at Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote the Book of Five Rings.
I mean, he was funny enough. I may have mentioned this before, but a guy I had known who's a friend's uncle, very kind of a blowhard guy, but he knew about Miyamoto Musashi and was like, Musashi knew who was the real guys and who wasn't the real guys. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. But Musashi was even like, there's people who will spit the BS, have the big schools, and have the all this nonsense because of families and whatnot. And there's people who are actually going to train and understand this. Which ones do you want to be a part of?
Yeah, and I mean, part of the thing that I always liked about him was, from what I've gathered from history, is he'd always approach things like, I don't know everything, but I know more than this person. I don't know everything, but I know more than this. How can I know more than this if I'm just training and they've got all these different entities and stuff? And I'm bringing this up because I think that's where people get into problem, like teachers and students. And one of my previous instructors, I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to out them or anything like that. But I mean, they would say, sometimes people start beginning to believe their own stuff. You can add adjectives into that, but we won't. We'll keep it PG. But I mean,
I like our first couple episodes.
I mean, it's when you start believing your own stuff, it's like, wow, I must be really, really good, and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. And there's one thing for confidence, there's another thing for false belief, I guess. I guess that's the best way, or false confidence, I guess. So.
Well, and there is a good A good way to kind of put that, where it's like, you know, if you have a teacher in a school who is training, as opposed to a teacher in a school that's sitting there watching.
Yeah.
Or I don't even say that because that's not always the case, but it's more of a teacher who's better as just walking around screaming orders, or somebody who thinks, you know, thinks of themselves real highly, rather than training with your students, rather than getting in there and working with them. And there's some teachers who can't do that as well anymore, age, injuries, whatever.
Right.
But you know, you can really trust that someone's at least trying to perfect what they're doing. And I think, you know, the best way to hedge that off is just don't be afraid to talk to other people. Don't be afraid to reach out and you know, experiment and always kind of re look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to, you know, to crack open, like crack some heads with some students. No, it's just more.
Sometimes it works, you know, but
Don't make me do another disclaimer on safety on here.
No.
But you just go. I've heard from one person that they don't want to spar with their students because they're afraid that they will either lose face or just beat the crap out of them. And sorry, not especially if you're making that particular part of training most important. You kind of have to jump into that. So
yeah, I do agree with that. I know for me, I used to make technique the most important part of my training. So guess what? Every class we're doing one or two techniques. Every class. And
that kind of be like you saying, I don't want to do technique on students because I'm afraid I'd hurt them, or I'm afraid they'd hurt me.
Well, I mean,
it won't work.
The only anytime a technique was going to potentially mess up with their nervous system or something like that, I was very careful. I was probably overly careful,
which is not a bad thing, especially when you're talking about.
No, I mean, and I think, you know, I think in that aspect, you know, trying to build that loyalty as well too, because I mean, you don't want to, you know, come here, I'm just gonna pound the absolute crap out of you, bam, you know, and just start knocking you out left and right. It's like, no.
At what point is it become an abusive relationship?
Yeah, you know, and it's not good. And I think also it does need to be under control because you're working with that student. You want to build that trust as well too. So I'm trying to think anything from the student perspective on loyalty.
Well, I think at what point do students become practitioners? And I think that's almost a complete different topic. But to kind of put a toe in that pool, as it were, you know, there's a certain point where a student will eventually mature, hopefully eventually matures, and it kind of, martial arts becomes a part of what they do, becomes a part of their life. And I think that where loyalty comes is where they stop necessarily seeing you as the one above all.
Yeah.
Or as somebody they can confide in and talk to, and where you actually do build a relationship with that person, rather than there's always this weird separation.
Yeah, and I think
is inevitable, but
yeah, and I think that becomes kind of an awkward time in training too, because at that point you've looked up to this person. This person's a role model or more, and you realize, hey, I'm starting to build my own understanding of everything, not just everything this person's teaching me, but also my understanding of what I'm getting. And, you know, at that point, how does that relationship evolve? Does it become, is there still loyalty there, or does it diverge into a split of some sort, or where you're butting heads?
Right. And I think it's important for students to understand you can eventually see the flaws in your own instructor. You will. Yeah. If your eyes are open enough, you will.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
But it's how you approach it sometimes is.
Yeah. And it's difficult. That's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, in one instance, I was definitely not very tactful, but you know, that's okay. But it needed to be done that way anyway. So, but anyway, we'll just leave it at that.
I think for anybody, you know, as long as you have a decent relationship with your teacher, as long as you have done everything you can to build a decent relationship with your teacher, Their response is on them, not on you.
Yeah. And and remember, this person is a teacher. They, at a point they are a role model. Don't look at them. Try not to look at them more than just a role model that somebody's teaching you, and eventually that relationship's going to change.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
So cool.
Well, we've tossed the ball enough on that topic. Anything you want to kind of close out on?
Not this week. I think I'm good this week. So.
Yeah, I think loyalty and kind of understanding what people perceive as secrets at least is important, and it's important to understand. If you want the secrets of martial art, just train.
Yeah.
Because there aren't, at the end of the day, there aren't a lot of secrets. It's just how much you put into your training.
And keep your eyes open. Keep
Yeah.
your eyes open while you're training.
Eyes closed training is not advisable.
Well, especially after you drink a lot of sake. But anyway,
Don't throw it around nunchaku, right?
yeah. Don't do drunk nunchaku class. That's bad. That's not good.
Cool. So Jeremy, what are you working on this week other than Snow Makiwara?
Basically, getting back to what I was last week is getting a set schedule. It's just everything was just kind of crazy because trying to get into work, and it's like, okay, well, my normal commute of 15 minutes is now like an hour and a half. So it's like, okay, yeah. So anyway, that's the way it goes.
Okay.
So.
I'm gonna be trying to kind of just strengthen my legs up a little more, just to make sure that I don't kind of peak out in running, but more with karate is focus on rebuilding a kata we worked on one time. Hopefully Nunti Broom will be just as good as Nunti Bow.
Exactly.
Well, folks, thanks for listening, watching, liking. The more people do that, the better it helps Google algorithm. Reach out to more people. That's where we're trying to kind of go. Allow this to kind of go out a little more naturally than trying to post this on anything, Facebook, Reddit, whatever. Social media, I personally find exhausting. So, more people actually like the YouTube stuff and more gets out there naturally. Cool. More you share it, less it has to do with us actually doing that. So, thanks for everyone who's been doing it. Thanks for people who've been donating to Shuri Joe and Australia. I feel like the current virus may spark another thing we have to possibly plug. Cool. Well, Jeremy looks like he's about to run out the door because there's a fire in his house. So, folks, thanks for listening. I'm John.
And I'm Jerry.
Keep on training.